when I think of a complete team, and when you have three phases, right? You have good pitching, you have good defense, and this team I would say has decent hitting. They've had good hitting the last month or so, right? This offense has turned around. But when I really think of a complete team, I think the last guy on this roster can contribute. The 26th man, or I guess now the 28th man, as the roster is expanded today to add two players, and most likely it's going to be Daniel Vogelbach and Justin Topa, two guys that have been out with injury for a while. The 28th man can contribute, and so can that first man. That first man being Willy Adames or Corbin Burns or Brandon Woodruff or Christian Yelich, whoever that one man is, all the way to that bottom man. That is a complete team to me, and I think the Brewers have one, and those are the types of teams that can win you a World Series. So let's start to compare a little bit the best Wisconsin sports teams of my lifetime, last 20, 25 years, with this Brewers team. Let's go back first to the 2011 Packers, because I think this is the most interesting comparison. The 2011 Packers, remember, it was the year after they won the Super Bowl. They were 15-1. They had the offensive weapons. They had Greg Jennings and Jordy Nelson and James Jones. They had offensive weapon after offensive weapon, and that offense was clicking like no other. They scored the most points in the NFL that year. So they could beat anyone, and they could beat them handily. So let's compare some of these specific wins that the Packers had in 2011 to the Brewers this year, okay? The Green Bay Packers in week 1 of that season. Remember, they opened the season, they raised the banner, all that, against the Saints, week 1 on a Thursday night. They beat the Saints 42-34. Randall Cobb with that run back for a touchdown on a kickoff. Again, they scored 42 points. That Saints team went on to be 13-3 that year. Yeah, that Saints team went on to be 13-3 that season. And so if you compare that to the Brewers, right? So the Packers got a 42-34 victory over one of the best teams in the NFC. The top two teams in the NL above the Brewers right now are the Dodgers and the Giants. Brewers are 6-3 against those guys. And if Garcia catches a fly ball at the end of the game a couple of weeks ago, they're 7-2 against the top two teams in the NL. So an example, Packers beating handily or soundly, scoring 42 points on a team that would eventually go 13-3 and go to the postseason. Meanwhile, the Milwaukee Brewers are 6-3 against the top two teams in the National League. How about this win? The Green Bay Packers beat the Detroit Lions 27-15 that year, and you're thinking to yourself, it's the Detroit Lions. And yes, you're right, it is the Detroit Lions. But Detroit went 10-6 that year. The Packers then beat the Lions 45-41 with Matt Flynn at quarterback. So that kind of shows they were scoring boatloads of points, even with their second-string guys out there, as Matt Flynn was like setting records in that game. That's what the Brewers have done too, though. They've gotten through injuries. Now, Matt Flynn wasn't playing because Rodgers was injured. They were resting Rodgers, but without your star players, right? Eduardo Escobar is one of the best baseball players on the Brewers after his acquisition at the end of July. Unfortunately, he's out with an injury right now, but they scored 7 runs against the Reds. That offensive output. Scored 7 runs against the Reds just last week. Reds are one of the top teams in the National League. And they've been scoring runs and winning games in June and July without Kane in the lineup and without Yelich producing. Now, here's my other question to you. Here's my more, I think, accurate comparison, because it's easy to go the Brewers offense against the Packers offense, right? It's easy to go offense and offense, defense and defense. But I'm going to switch it up in your mind a little bit. So see if you can follow me on this. Although we've been comparing the Brewers offense to the Packers offense in the last couple of examples, I think it would make more sense to compare the pitching of the Milwaukee Brewers to the Packers offense. Because what was the strength of the 2011 Packers? It was their offense. It was Aaron Rodgers. It was Greg Jennings. It was Jermichael Finley. It was Jordy Nelson, right? What is the strength of the 2021 Brewers? It's their pitching. That's what everybody thinks about when you think about the Brewers. You think about their pitching. Corbin Burns, Brandon Woodruff, Freddie Peralta. 3 of the top pitchers in the National League. 3 of the top pitchers in baseball. So let's compare how the Packers offense was in 2011 with the Brewers pitching. And you're like, Hunter, this is apples to broccoli. Not so fast. I know. The usual saying is apples to oranges, but you're probably thinking it's even worse than that I'm comparing fruits and vegetables. Maybe I am here, but I think it's interesting because I think these things kind of work themselves into a very similar category. So let's take the Brewers pitching and the Packers offense. So the Brewers are currently third in team earned run average. So they're basically third in pitching in the major leagues behind San Francisco and the LA Dodgers. The Packers in 2011 were first in scoring. So both are in the top three in their strengths, right? Packers first, Brewers third in their strengths of their season. Packers in 2011, Brewers in 2021. We're comparing the two teams here. You're listening to the Sports Cue on WJJQ. Me, Hunter Baumgart, your host. The Brewers are 26th in team offense this year. In batting average, the Brewers are 26th in the MLB in team batting average. The Packers in 2011 on defense, not a very good defense. They were 19th. They were bottom half in defense in 2011. Even though they went 15-1, they were still bad at defense that year. Brewers, they're 29 games over 500. They're not very good at offense. Right? So very similar downfalls. So both teams clearly had their strengths that carried them and then had a downfall on the other side of the ball. The only thing that could hold back these Brewers is their offense. The only thing that held back the 2011 Packers, their defense. It's switched, so you may have a hard time, making that work in your brain. I know we're comparing offense to defense here. But the Packers' 2011 offense was what the 2021 Brewers pitching staff is. Carrying the team, and when they get contribution from the other side of the ball, that makes them deadly. So we'll get back to that in a moment, but let's add one more comparable stat here. Against playoff teams, okay? So fellow playoff teams, right? The 2011 Packers were the 1 seed in the NFC. There was a bunch of other teams that made the playoffs, obviously. In the regular season, the Green Bay Packers went 6-0 in 2011 against fellow playoff teams. They did not lose to a fellow playoff team. They beat the Falcons, they beat the Saints, they beat the Lions twice, they beat the Giants, and they beat the Broncos, all who made the playoffs. The Brewers right now against the Dodgers, Giants, Braves, and Padres, the top four teams outside of the Brewers are 14-8 against them. That's 6 games over 500. Just like those 2011 Packers. That's a really good record against the other playoff teams, by the way. If you're looking at the Milwaukee Brewers going 6 games over 500 against the 4 teams right now that would make the playoffs if the season ended today. So that's another comparable stat between the two. So obviously I hope what happened to the 2011 Packers doesn't happen to the 2021 Brewers because that would mean they get upset in the first round. But I just find that hard to believe to happen because of how good the Brewers pitching staff is. And yes, you could say that the Packers offense was dynamite too, and they still lost. And yes, that's true. But that was a mistake-laden game for the Packers. I went back and watched some highlights today of that Packers-Giants divisional game in 2011. So if you can't remember the 2011 season that the Packers did go 15-1, they didn't win the Super Bowl that year. They lost to the Giants in the divisional round of the postseason. And I went back and watched some highlights. That game did not go well. They did not play well. They fumbled. Rodgers missed some throws. I think the Brewers have a manager in Craig Counsell that prepares this team so well to play, and they have a complete roster that rarely makes mistakes. If you think about this Brewers team, you hardly ever see this team get caught in a rundown or make a base running blunder or miss a sign or, to be honest, make errors in the field, too. I know sometimes the defense has been questioned. I don't see why. This team hardly does not make a ton of errors. So thus, I don't think the Brewers lose in the first round. I think they make it to at least the NLCS. And to be honest, are we at a point now, because they're so good, is it World Series or bust for these Milwaukee Brewers? Will this season be a failure if they don't make it to the World Series because of how good this pitching is? That's a topic we can dig into maybe next week. But my quick answer to that is no, it's not a failure. But there could be an argument for it. So you're probably like, all right, we compared Brewers-Packers. Can we compare Brewers and another Brewers really good team? Yes, we're going to do that next. So we're going to take a quick break, and we are going to come back and discuss the 2011 Brewers, who were the only other team in Brewers history to have a 10.5 game lead in the division. We're going to compare the 2011 Brewers with these Brewers. That 2011 Brewers team went to the NLCS and lost to the Cardinals. We'll see what this Brewers team has in store, but I want to compare them because it's interesting to go back. And so we've compared a baseball and a football team. I want to compare baseball to baseball. We'll do that next. You're listening to the Sports Cue. If you have any thoughts, 715-453-4481. You think I'm way off base, give me a call, 715-453-4481. Or if you agree, Give me a call. Would love to hear from you. Sports Q continues next.
Talking about the sports teams that you care about. Youth, high school, college, and pro. This is the Sports Q on WJJQ.
Back here on the Sports Q on Northwoods 92.5 WJJQ. I'm Hunter Baumgart, your host, talking Wisconsin and local sports till 7 o'clock tonight like we do each and every Wednesday evening. Coming up at 6:05, we'll talk Badgers football. Colton Bartholomew, who is the Badgers beat reporter for the Wisconsin State Journal, going to join me. Can't wait to pick his brain about these Wisconsin Badgers. He is a fantastic Badgers guest, and I'm really excited to talk Badgers with Colton. So that's coming up at 6:05. Lauren Pfeiffer, head coach, Tomahawk Volleyball, coming up 6:40 as well tonight. So, busy show. Want to continue the Brewers talk, though, because we just compared the Brewers to the 2011 Packers, and you probably want to hear me compare them to a Brewers team that was really good. How about the 2011 Brewers, the only other team that has ever held a 10.5 game lead in the division like these Brewers do right now? So, let's compare the 2011 Brewers to the 2021 Brewers. So going back to that 2011 season, the Brewers were 8th in batting and 9th in pitching. So you could say that that team maybe was more complete because of the higher batter ranking, right? Those two numbers average out to be about the 8.5 best team in baseball if you average batting and pitching, right? The middle 8.5 best, there's no good way to say that, but they're about 8th or 9th best team in baseball. And this year's team average, 3rd in pitching, real good in pitching, and 26th, though, in batting. So that gets you to 14, about 14th best team in baseball, 14th, 15th. However, that year for the Milwaukee Brewers in 2011, you just didn't have the studs in your rotation that you do now. The rotation the Brewers threw at the Cardinals in the NLCS in 2011 averaged a 3.65 ERA. The Brewers' rotation that they would throw right now at a team in a playoff series of Hauser and obviously the top three, Peralta, Woodruff, Burns, they have an average of 2.69 ERA. That's about a full run less. 2.69 average ERA for the rotation that you would throw at a team in the playoffs compared to 3.65 in that 2011. And you have it just, looking back at that 2011 playoff rotation for the Milwaukee Brewers, it was Zach Greinke. Okay, Zach Greinke, obviously a really good player. But otherwise, it was Sean Markham, Giovanni Gallardo, and Randy Wolf. That just doesn't hold water other than Greinke to Corbin Burns, Brandon Woodruff, and Freddie Peralta this year. It just doesn't. So we'll get back to the pitching in a second. Now, was that offense really good in 2011? Yes, and that is what carried them past Arizona in the NLDS and to the Cardinals in the NLCS. You had Braun, who batted .332. You had Niger Morgan, who batted .304. You had Prince Fielder, who batted .299. You had Corey Hart, who batted .285. So that is what got them there. That is what got them to where they were in 2011. But what wins in the postseason? And that year was even an example of this. What wins in the postseason? Pitching. And going back to that 2011 Packers team, what wins championships, as the cliche goes in the NFL? Defense. The Packers didn't have that. And the Brewers in 2011 didn't have the pitching as well as they could have. The Brewers in 2021 have the recipe. And if their offense can continue to play like it has against the Giants, and as of late, they could win the whole thing. They truly could. This team is better than the 2011 Brewers in my eyes. And a lot of it is because that pitching is better. And also, they have a better manager in Craig Counsell. And like I mentioned, the pitching. I mean, how many times am I going to say the pitching? But seriously. So when I went back and saw those rankings in 2011, these teams are very similar, right? These teams were 20-some games over 500, both 2011 and this year, right? We're talking about the Brewers here. 2011 Brewers, 2021 Brewers. Both teams were over 20 games over 500. Both teams held a 10.5 game lead in the division. But when you look at where the strengths were on both of the teams, it made sense that the Milwaukee Brewers didn't win that NLCS against the St. Louis Cardinals. It makes sense because they didn't have what wins in the postseason, and that is pitching. And so that is why I think the Brewers are more primed for a World Series trip this year than they have been in any year past in the last 20. 2008, 2011, 2018, right? Remember 2018? They were one game away from the World Series. 2018, this Brewers team was one win away from the World Series. They lost Game 7 at home to the Dodgers. And you say, Hunter, why aren't you going more in depth on 2018? Because that team was the closest team to the World Series since 82. And yes, you are exactly right. That team wasn't as good. Sure, they had some real good... It was kind of built like that 2011 team where they had a really good offense. You got guys like Mike Moustakas and Yasmani Grandal, and Christian Yelich was having a great year, and Lorenzo Cain, right? You had that really good offense. But again, what wins in the postseason? It is pitching. And the Brewers have it this year. And in 2018, they had, and I mentioned this last week on the show, they had guys like Wade Miley throwing a batter, to a batter, and then getting pulled, and then like doing bullpen games, and Woodruff coming out of the bullpen, and Burns out of the bullpen, and you had kind of a just what Counsell would do is basically piecemeal 9 innings and somehow get wins, which was incredible looking back on it. But now you've got guys in the starting rotation that can go 6-7 innings, and then you hand it off to Brad Boxberger, who's been exceptional over the last couple months, and Devin Williams, who's been exceptional for most of the year, and Josh Haders, who's been exceptional all year and only blown one save. That is the recipe for this team to win the World Series. And so that is why I think this team is better than the 2011 team.